Hi all, this is the badging video for the vinyl cutter here at MakeHaven. So here we have the vinyl cutter, and this is the vinyl cutter station where we have the computer, screen, keyboard, and mouse to control it. And we're just going to take the cover off so we can get a better look. This is just the dust cover, and it should be put back on the machine whenever you are done using it. The premise of this machine is that there is a little razor blade right in here, and it can swivel around. So it's just getting dragged around, and then sheets of material, which is most often vinyl, which is sticky plastic with a paper backing, is fed forwards and backwards with these rollers. And then this head moves back and forth to cut the material. You can send a file to the cutter from the computer, and then this goes and cuts out your shape. Then after the vinyl cutter has gone around and has cut the vinyl, then you have something like this, and you can peel that sticky vinyl off of the paper backing and stick it onto other things, like the writing up on the wall up there. There are a few tools that make that process easier, so we'll get to using the transfer tape in a little bit. Before we get started with actually using the machine, we are going to look a little more closely at the blade and the blade holder. So you can just unscrew this and it opens up this little gate, and we're going to look at this guy, and we're actually going to go over to the drawer over by the lasers where we keep all the vinyl cutter accessories. So in here are a few vinyl cutter related things. One are these picks, which we're going to use for the process of weeding, which is picking out the little bits of vinyl that we don't want. And in here are extra blades as well as some other accessories. So in general, we use the red capped 45-degree blades because it's a good middle ground in terms of blade angle. But sometimes, let's say you were doing something that was quite thick, then you might want to use the 60-degree blade. The 45, if it was like that, the 60-degree, by being sharper, has more blade cutting through the thicker material. It's just taller. Versus a 30-degree blade is better for thinner materials because, you know, at a lower angle, then it has more of that blade surface cutting through the vinyl. So in general, we use the red capped ones, and the new blades live in here. If you think that a blade is dull and you want to replace it, then I'll show you the sharps container where you can put the dull blades. Some other things in here that are pretty cool are pen attachments. So if you wanted to use the tool as a plotter, where it draws out shapes on a sheet of paper, that's what this pen is for. This is just a hard tip which can be used to indent and score things. And then the rest of the things are mostly just other picks. So we have our blade here, and the next thing I want to look at is the blade exposure. So here you can hopefully see that there's just the teensiest amount of blade sticking out of the tip. A good rule of thumb is to make it a half thickness of a credit card. That's what people often say. I just try to make it stick out just a teensy bit, and then do a test cut, which we'll look at. If you want to change the amount that the blade is sticking out because you're using a thicker material or a thinner material, then you can twist this cap on the top. And by twisting it, you expose more or less of the blade. And then on the back, this is what the machine pushes on to push down on the blade. Like that. And over here is the sharps container where you can put the dull blades into. Okay, so we're gonna now put our blade holder back in its little cage, and it's important that the blade sit underneath that little tab, just like that. And then we are going to tighten this right back up. Doesn't need to be crazy tight, just snug. And that's back in action. One note is you should never move this by hand. So you should only move it using the control panel, never try to move it by hand. And one last note before we get started is that when you are not using the vinyl cutter, when there isn't material being pinched in there, being held in there, this handle should be in the back down position. Here it's squeezing, the rollers are squeezing, and it'll wear out the springs if you leave it like that. So in general, leave it in that back position. All right, so we're now gonna turn the machine on just by pushing the power button. And the head is coming back over here. And now I want to show you a few things on the computer before we get started with the machine. So here on the computer, there are a few things on the home screen that we want to look at. One is right up here. This is the manual for the vinyl cutter. And in this manual, there are some tutorials. If we go over the contents, so it'll walk you through some basic cutting, and there is troubleshooting. There's all kinds of cool things in here. There's also more advanced features. So if you get to a point where you want to be cutting out stickers, you want to do perforated cutting, you want to do tiling, or you want to, if you have something really big that you want to go over multiple pieces of vinyl, all sorts of things like that, you can find the instructions in here. In this current video, we are just going to look at sort of basic cutting. The next piece of software that is useful is CutStudio down here. So this is the software that we use to send the files to the vinyl cutter. You can make your file, your design, in any other program you want. So you could use Illustrator, Inkscape. You can even import raster files like a JPEG or PNG and then trace them in this software. But if you're bringing in a vector file, which is probably coming from Inkscape or Illustrator, and it means that it's already just lines that the vinyl cutter can follow, then you're going to click Import, and then it prefers AI or EPS files. So when you're exporting your file from your other software, you want to choose AI or EPS. All right, so now that we have this open, we are going to load our first piece of material into the vinyl cutter. So we're going to start with this piece of material. There's free scrap vinyl down in this bin underneath the vinyl cutter for doing smaller cuts or just test cuts. On this machine, the origin, the starting point, is at the bottom left corner. So on our old machine, it was on the right side. Here it's actually on the left side. So that's kind of important to note, and you always want to align your material to the left side of the machine. So here we have this material, and we're going to put it in here. There are lines on the front, and those lines are to help you make sure that your material is straight. So we're going to try to line it up with that. Then, so there's two rollers. These pinch rollers hold the material down against this spinning bar on the bottom. The left roller needs to be in one of these four positions. So it can't go over here because your material is aligned to the left, so it needs to be in one of these four positions. And that wheel, the roller, needs to be within a white mark. So to get this piece of vinyl fully captured, I'm going to put the vinyl just about here so that there's vinyl on either side of the wheels, and then make sure that it's lined up with those lines, and then pull up here. And now it's clamped. The material is held down. Another note is that the cutter can only cut between the wheels. So if you want to get more, if you want to use more of your material, then we could try to align it like this, but then we're getting pretty close to the edge there. So we could try to do that, but it might be slightly less happy with this scenario. All right, so here's our material clamped down. And then over here, it's asking us what kind of material we've put into it. And it's not a roll, so we're gonna go down. We're not looking for the edge, we're looking for a piece, because this is just a piece of material. I'm gonna hit enter, and it's gonna go and measure our piece of material. All right, so it says that it's 8.9 inches wide by 7.3 inches tall. That's how much material we have to work with here. So it knows that value, and we're gonna go over to the computer and ask the machine what value it has. So we're gonna go over to File, and then Cutting Setup. And here, we're gonna tell it the printer we're using is the GS-24. Now that we have selected the right printer under media size, we're gonna click Change, select inches, just so we're consistent, click Get from Machine, and then the computer just successfully asked the machine what the dimensions of our part are. You can click OK. And then the cutting conditions, it's saying we're just going to use whatever the machine is saying, but we could also ask the machine and then change them if we wanted to. But we'll just click OK. And now we can see that our origin is in that bottom left corner. So that means that we want to, this leading edge is the leading edge of our material, and that bottom left corner is the origin that we set where the tool is currently located, or if we were setting it manually where it's located. And then not only is the origin in the right place, but this is the size of our material. So as long as our design fits on here, we know that it'll fit on the material that the machine just measured. So that's pretty cool. Now, before we put a design in here and send it to the machine, we are going to come over here and do a test cut to make sure that our pressure settings and the blade exposure are correct. So let's get it just a little bit more on the material. So we're going to come over here and use the arrow buttons to move it left, right, back, forward. And then the forwards back is referring to the position of the material. So if you push this button, the down button, it pulls the material closer to you. And then we'll go to the right a little bit. All right, but we're sitting right on top of another test, so we'll go over here a little more. Then we're gonna push test. You just hold it for a second, and it's going and zippity-doo-dah, cutting out a little piece. And now we are just gonna move it forwards, holding that button. And now we're gonna just poke at our little design here and see how it looks. So I could get a tool, but what I'm going to do is just use my fingernail, and that looks like a nice clean edge. It came up easily, and when we pull it, it doesn't pull out that square in the middle. So that's a good sign. That means it cut all the way through. If it pulled up that square with it, then that would mean we have a problem. And then here we're going to pull out the square, and we find out that this is a Christian machine. And that cross looks pretty good. The corners are really sharp. So if the corners weren't sharp, then you would have to change the offset, which we can look at in the machine settings, but they look really crisp. And then if we look at the bottom, you can see that it didn't cut through. So it cut through our vinyl, but it didn't cut through the backing paper, which is good. If it cuts into the backing paper, then that's just gonna dull the blade and slow it down. So that's pretty perfect how we got it. So now what we're gonna do is go back to the left side. And you notice that it stops itself right here. So that blade is now just to the inside of the roller, about 1 millimeter. So that's how wide it can cut, is right between those two rollers, about 1 millimeter in from each of them. And then we're gonna go back a little bit, and then there's this hole, so we're just gonna get a little north of that so that we don't cut into it. And then here, by hitting origin for about a second, we just set the origin. So now it knows that that's the place where we want to start our design. One more note is that this machine won't accept instructions from the computer until you have measured your workpiece, until it shows a screen like this. If you do a roll, then it'll know the width, it'll measure that, but the roll is so long that for the length, it won't show you a number because it's too long to have a number. But if it is in the screen where it says select roll edge piece, then it won't accept any files from the computer. So make sure to have measured the piece before trying to send a file. All right, so let's do some exploring into the menus here. So we saw what test did. It made that cross. Origin sets our origin. Pause is pretty self-explanatory. If you're in the middle of a cut, you just push pause, and it'll stop it. Push pause again, it'll keep it going. The arrows, pretty straightforward. Menu we'll look at. Force we'll look at. Enter, pretty straightforward. So the idea behind force is just how hard is our blade pushing down. And you want to change that up or down to make sure you're cutting all the way through your material, but not into the backing material. So here, if we click force, then it brings up this, and we can generally leave it at the 50 grams of force setting. If you wanted to change it, if you were finding that it wasn't quite cutting through enough, there are two options. You can change it here by using the up-down keys, and that changes it by 10. Or if you want a little more granular control, you can do this while it's cutting. You can move the pen force here, +2 or -2. So if you just want it to go a little deeper, a little shallower, that's how you do it. So we're gonna back out of the force, and we're gonna go into menu. So 20 centimeters per second is pretty fast, but you could move that up or down if you wanted to. 50 grams we already spoke about. And then the 0.25 millimeters is the offset of the blade. So most of the blades have an offset of 0.25 millimeters, but if you used a blade that had a different offset, you would want to change that accordingly. When you have a blade at an angle, the offset is how far the tip of the blade is from the middle axis, the turning axis of that blade. And so for some blades, it's a different number. All right, so we'll click menu again. That brings us to this set of menus. So here we can click through. Unsetup is just the opposite of setup. It's what you do when you're done cutting. If you click unsetup, it gets rid of the size of your material and it moves the head back to the right side so you could load more material. Click down. Condition is just things like force, speed, offset, stuff like that. And then there are other things that you can look at in the manual to learn more about, like up speed, which is speeding up between cuts, rotating your cut, changing the quality, which has more to do with the thickness of the material. Extend, I don't remember what that does. Area is useful because it will help more material come out before you're cutting. So often if you have a big roll of material on here and you try to start cutting, then it has to pull on that roll. By entering the area of the material here, then it will pull that out in advance so it isn't tugging on it. And we're back to force, so now we'll go back. Crop marks, those are, for more advanced things where you're cutting out something like a sticker. Others, stuff like smoothing, the units, factory defaults, test, contrast, pre-feed, overcut is off. So there's all different kinds of features in here. Really, for the most part, the one that you need to look at the most is just unsetup. By clicking unsetup, it just moves it back to the right side. And as a reminder, you get there. So here's the main screen where it's normally sitting. You push menu once, and that shows you the settings for your cut. You push menu again, and that brings you into like the setup menu where you can click through all those options. And then if we push menu again, it brings us back to that main home screen. Alrighty, so now we're gonna send a file from the computer over here. So we're just gonna take some text and say, yay, vinyl cut. And I don't know, maybe a shape around it. Now you can tell that this software isn't terribly advanced, it isn't terribly well featured. So this is good for pretty basic things, but if you want to do more complicated designs, it probably makes sense to use software like Inkscape or Illustrator that has more features built into it. So here's our cool sticker. It says, yay, vinyl cut. We have already brought in our information through cutting setup. Let's say you wanted to make stickers, just as a note, those things are under print and cut, but we are going to click on cutting. And here we have our design. Let's say you had multiple colors that you wanted to do differently, then you could do select color, but we're not doing that. Here, it's just defaulting to the machine settings, so we could control those from the computer, but it's just gonna accept whatever the printer has. We're gonna click OK. Come over here. And it just cut our stuff out. So now we're gonna come over to here and we are going to click menu, menu, enter. And then we're gonna release the material here, pull it out, and look at the next step. We're gonna get something else from over here, which is transfer tape. So transfer tape lives down here. And we also want a weeding tool. So I'll just grab this one. It has a pointy end and an angled pointy end. That should do the trick. And we're gonna grab one of these cards. And I'm gonna grab a pair of scissors. The scissors live right here. So I'm just gonna start by cutting out the general shape of our design. So then for weeding, we're gonna just use our little pokey tool to remove the parts we don't want. So there's that. And now we're going to remove each of the letters. And then sometimes what you'll find, like in this case, is I'm going to pick out the N, but the rest of the vinyl is coming with it. So in that case, you just want to find a different spot, and I'm going to pull it from here, and there we go, the backing stayed there. There are other tricks that you can use, like just, pushing down on the material to make sure it's stuck to the backing, but, normally it's not too bad if the vinyl cutter did a good job of cutting all the way through the vinyl. The trickier parts, when you have something like an A, and you have that middle piece captive within it. And so you want to make sure that you leave the middle parts of the letters untouched. Those can get tricky, especially when you're doing smaller letters. All right, so now we have our sticker. But if we were to just sort of peel that off, we'd have a hard time managing it and trying to stick it on things. So that's what we use the transfer tape for. So we have this big roll of transfer tape. And for this little sticker, we just need a small piece of transfer tape. So now we have this piece of transfer tape, which is pretty much just a big piece of masking tape. And then we're gonna stick it right on here, nice and flat. And then we're going to use this card to really press it on there. Just like that. Okay. And now, when we have our thing that we want to stick the sticker onto, what we can do is just peel this off. And the magic here is that the transfer tape stickiness is more sticky than the connection between that blue vinyl and the backing tape. So when we pull this, the hope is that it comes off on the transfer tape. Sometimes it doesn't do it perfectly, and you need to kind of go back and keep rubbing it with the squeegee to help get it really stuck to the transfer tape. But in this case, it worked great. So now you can stick this sticker onto something else. So this is just a piece of paper. And we're gonna stick it right on here and use the card again. And we're gonna transfer it back down, in this case to paper. You could put the sticker on a glass window, on a wall. You can, put it wherever you wanna stick it to. And different kinds of vinyl will last different amounts of time and be more UV resistant or more colorful. Online you can find all different kinds of vinyl available. And then when you peel the transfer tape off, your vinyl sticker is beautifully stuck to the paper, just like that. So very cool. Now we're gonna go back to the vinyl wall for a minute. And over here you can see all the different vinyls that we have available. And these are for purchase, so most people don't wanna buy a super long roll. And so we buy them, and then you can just buy pieces of it. So here on the wall, you can see the prices. The rolls up to 15 inches wide are 10 cents per linear inch, so inches long. And then the 15 to 24 inches wide are 15 cents per linear inch. You can pay at makehaven.org/store or in a cash box. That cost includes the cost of the transfer tape. Down here, you can see the note that heat transfer vinyl. So that means vinyl that isn't for sticking on a car or on a window or on a wall, but is heat transferred. So you use a heat press to press it onto something like a shirt, is also available in the store in the back. And Armoret, which is a chemical that you can use to etch things like glass. So you'd use the vinyl and then put that on glass, like a sticker, and then put the armor etch on top, and it would just etch the glass where the vinyl wasn't protecting it. Those are available in the store in the back. And then here is the heat press. So you can get the heat press badge if you want to use that to heat press the vinyl onto something like a shirt. And then here's just some more surprise is the vinyl is not laser safe. So if you can't put the vinyl in the laser. And then here are some QR codes if you want to scan those to pay directly. So what I'm going to do now is grab a roll of vinyl so we can see how using a roll works in the machine. It's not complicated. So we're just going to place the roll on the rollers in the back. And then same as the other material, you want to align it over to the left. So we'll pull this through just like that. And you want to make sure it's aligned with the line so it's nice and straight. And now we want to move the rollers so that they are in the middle of the white marks, except it looks like for this we're going to have to move it a little bit one way or the other. To get the far edge onto a mark, we're going to move it over this way. So now this roller can sit happily here. And then this roller will sit just like that. All right, and now we can lock the handle. So now that we have the material locked in here, we can come over here and it is asking us to tell it what material we have in there because we did unset, so it went back to its default settings. And this is a roll. You could also do edge if you wanted to. That's similar to roll, except it just starts from higher up on the edge. So if you wanted to leave a margin at the bottom, you could start it from a higher position on your roll and then it'll leave that. But we're just gonna tell it it's a roll. And click enter. And it's gonna go and measure this, just like it did for the piece, except because we told it a roll, it's not gonna try to measure the whole length. And then we'll come over here. And now when we click File, Cutting Setup, and then the media size, we're gonna put it in inches and click Get from Machine. And it's getting from the machine that the width of the material is 13.2 inches wide. And it says 62 inches in length, but it just says that because that's the max value that it can send over. So you can kind of ignore that number. So we click OK, OK, and now we have our huge canvas here with the origin in the bottom left corner. One note is that if you make a design in here and then save the file, which you should definitely do if you have something that you want to keep. So if we click Save, it'll save it as a CutStudio document, and then you should save it to your own USB or email it to yourself or something, because files saved on the public MakeHaven computers are not guaranteed to stick around. But if you did want to save it to the computer, just for a minute or something, then if you go to the desktop, there is a folder called Member Files where you can put all of your files. However, it will not save the size of the canvas, of the material, because that is a function of the material you put in there. So you'll have to re-import that information when you open up your file again. Now, if we wanted to change the material or remove the material, we do the same menu, and that brings us to Unsetup. Click Enter. Comes over here, and now we can remove our roll. Just like that. Now, let's say you had printed something really long, and when it was done, your piece had rolled out the front of the machine. This slot here is for running a knife through. So what you could do is just take a blade and run it through here to cut off your material for when you're done. And then when you're done using the machine, you just push and hold the power button, it turns off, and then we're gonna put the dust cover back on and put away all of the tools we took out and make sure the area's nice and clean, and then you are good to go. Thanks for watching.